Thank you, Shireen. I'll make my comments fairly brief, although Shireen and I did not get together to talk about our final comments. They have many similarities. I'd like to make mine as someone who comes from outside the region, and yet I see great similarities in the discussions that have happened over the past 2 days and the ones that I have had in other parts of the world. I'd like to make 3 points about things that I think were important in our conversations over the past 2 days. The first one is that several people, including Shireen in her very first comments, talked about how aging in the MENA region has been particularly rapid. And that means that policy development to support aging populations also needs to occur quickly. I wish I could say that for those of us who come from countries where aging happened over a very, very long period of time, we've got it figured out. We haven't entirely. We keep being surprised by the proportions of older people in our various populations. But there is one thing that I think we've learned and that I've heard in the last 2 days here. And that is that if we think about supporting older people and policies to support older people, we need to think very carefully about the policy priorities. Because policy issues, as many of you said, are interconnected. There are issues of income security, and there's much talk about pensions during this last 2 days, about social connections, about broad contexts like climate change. I was interested, there wasn't a great deal of talk about housing, but housing in terms of place and where people age is particularly important. So these form often what we call policy silos, that government departments go off and they work on their own separate agenda, and it's hard to bring them together. I think we need to be vigilant about those and to be asking always how they interconnect and where are the important interconnections. The second point is that I'm heartened to see that so many countries in this region are developing aging agendas. These are really important. They focus our policy efforts. They help create frameworks for the oversight that many of you have talked about. And they raise responsibilities about the relative importance and responsibility of governments, of older people, and of families. These sometimes are called the social contract. Often the desired balance is implicit and it needs to be named. These broad aging agendas are informed by some of the big social justice principles that we've heard about from many of our UN colleagues: inclusion, social connections, human rights. They're grounded in the social development goals and in the work of many UN agencies that you've heard from in the last 2 days. The good news is that aging is solidly on international agendas. And I think that's a huge advantage in terms of the work that we're trying to do in our own countries and our own settings. So the question to me is, how do countries ground their aging agendas within their local resources and in the cultural beliefs in the country about what's fair and just and equitable? Are there tensions between generations, between human rights of older persons and those of family members, for example, who care for them, between those who are in the labor force and those who are not? Countries must determine, for example, whether their aging agendas are focused on those who are most marginalized, especially in countries where there are huge disparities. And finally, I would say that supporting older persons means thinking about them and also thinking about their carers. We've heard a lot about the cultural grounding in the MENA region of the importance of families in care. So many countries have these familist beliefs. And in fact, in most countries around the world, the vast majority of care is provided by families, mostly women in families. But we've also had considerable conversations in the last 2 days about those who are professionals working in care: nurses, social workers, psychologists, physicians, plus many whose work we don't track and don't see, such as domestic help and migrant workers. We've heard again and again that the long-term labor force is disadvantaged, marginalized, often poorly paid. In most places, we don't know who are the members of that labor force. So the third question that is mine from this issue about thinking about carers is that we've got big data gaps around care. And there are three in particular that I think are important, and that I think we really need if we're going to provide the evidence for our governments, our NGOs, and so on to take the directions they need to take. The first is that we don't have, as Dr. Michton has said, we don't have good data on social connections and loneliness of older people. We also don't have good data on social connections and loneliness of those who care for them. We need data on both of those. What are the right settings for people who are carers for older people, and how might those change? And that's the second point. Data are needed on the best place to live. We've talked, and many people have talked about not only aging in place, but aging in the right place, and what options are available to people as that right place might change over their later life course. How many options are there for many people to choose that right place? And finally, we need data on both older people and on their carers about things like their own income, their own resources, their own agency in choosing the life that they wish to live. So the last point is that for older people, for family members, for those who are paid carers, the whole question of what does it mean to them to be able to be and do what they most value. I like that question. I know it's one that's framed much of the work that WHO has done on the UN decade. It's a big one, and there's much we need to know. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Shireen, in particular, for putting together this really marvelous meeting. I think there are many opportunities for moving forward, for connecting within the region, and I hope connecting with those of us who are truly interested in what's going on within the MENA region.